Ambassador, thank you so much for dedicating your time to be here and actually addressing us and the whole audience. I'd like to ask you a few questions about your position as ambassador and also in relation to cultural diplomacy. First of all, you have been an ambassador to the United States for quite some time now. You're in your second term, if I'm correct? Yeah. Have you, in this whole time, seen any developments in cultural diplomacy? Has there been a shift to more use of culture in the United States from your position?
That will be a complicated answer because it cannot be a yes or no answer. Of course, there is a movement towards trying to understand better other cultures, other nations, and the Americans are very sincere and earnest in trying to learn more about the rest of the world. But if I am to specify a cultural diplomacy as a tool, as a method of conducting diplomacy, I don't think it's yet the case. That's for a number of reasons. America is very different from Europe in terms of its system and even in the way they organize their cultural activities. So it wouldn't be so much an institutional effort, which has its beauty because there are many, many organizations of arts and culture, and they're eager to engage with diplomats and with embassies. So if I'm to describe what cultural diplomacy looks like in America, it would be these non-for-profits in both amateur and professional arts and culture, engaging very, very eagerly with the embassies.
And there's an increase of cooperation with those institutes?
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. But again, it's a very different concept there. It is just people who are interested in pursuing, let's say, amateur piano competitions. And I'm not inventing this. There is such an organization which brings together amateur pianists, and they always engage with embassies as their partners. Because one thing which I should say, and which I particularly like, is that embassies and ambassadors are held in very high esteem in the US.
Yeah, okay, thank you. I think I can imagine that in the United States, the first idea of Bulgaria would be a country that used to be part of the Soviet Union, and now Bulgaria is actually part of the European Union, considered very Western. Do you think that cultural diplomacy has played a role in Bulgaria itself in the shift from former Soviet state to now EU state?
This is essential, because until you change the perceptions, you've done nothing. And that can only happen through culture and education. Definitely, we had to reintroduce ourselves as people, as Bulgarians, but not just to America, to Europe as well. Although Europe has always been tightly knit, it's not that we've been as isolated from Europe, but still there were very strict limitations to what kind of exchanges we could have. Mostly science, law, medicine suffered the most. Some performing arts could be more kind of open to exchanges, but those very serious branches of science and culture, which had to do with the development, the advancement of the country, they were practically closed off. So we had to prove and to show that we have our own merits in those areas. But it was a two-way street, because I'm not saying that we were only wronged by history and wronged by others who didn't know us. Bulgaria has a lot to do to integrate itself culturally in its family of European nations and transatlantically as well. So it's a two-way street, always.
Yes. In response to that, the Cold War was always referred to as the high point of cultural diplomacy, mostly because between Soviet Union and United States. Do you have the feeling that the West, or like the EU, the more Western European states, are more open to a Bulgarian culture and cultural exchange than since the accession to the EU?
Oh, absolutely. That's why I made the special point of explaining that there was a real wall, since we are talking of a wall these days, of exchanges in not just in politics. We all knew that politics was so clearly divided and determined, not to speak of the military aspect of security. That was a given. Two completely different worlds that never communicated. But that also went for some some areas of culture and diplomacy, philosophy, for example, that were political science. They were considered to be more subversive. They could somehow bring some wrong ideas in the heads of the people. And this is why there the restrictions were the strongest. Well, in terms of strictly cultural assets, it could be that we may be better known instinctively, better understood by our neighbors and Europe as a bigger area of our own. But again, comparing to the US, what really brings tears to my eyes is the passion with which Americans try to learn Bulgarian folk dances and songs, and they put together strictly American groups, and there were times when I would never even understand that they were not Bulgarian because of the pronunciation, the beautiful way in which they've mastered dance and text and music. So I think that the important thing especially about cultural diplomacy, is to have your heart open to it. When your heart is open, it's always a go.
Well, that's definitely a positive sign for the field of cultural diplomacy. A very nice example. If we look at your CV and your bibliography, we see that you've had some very high positions, and therefore had played a very important role in women's rights and women's empowerment. Do you think that cultural diplomacy can play a role in women empowerment around the world?
Of course it may, because we're good at that. We women are very good at that. On the other hand, it still is very much a man's world when it comes to politics, to security. So I would think, and this is really a very spontaneous answer to your question because I've never thought of it until now, I think we should definitely try to bring in our strong component. Even when we discuss some very, very barren, very, how should I call them, raw, severe issues of military security or politics in general. So yes, the answer is yes. And it is becoming more and more logical. That's becoming more and more true. Because look at now I'm thinking again, look at the conflicts in the Middle East. If you don't have a cultural feel for why it all started, how it is developing, where it is going, you can never make your seemingly more serious decisions in terms of politics and military security.
I guess women empowerment in the Middle East is also a very interesting topic to
It is. It is because it's starting, and we can see it appearing, not as visibly and as massively as we want, but it is starting. It's inevitable. This is like nature, like day and night. So it's happening.
Yeah, and on that note, in looking at progress, I would like to ask you one final question about how do you see the future of cultural diplomacy and soft power in the area of ambassadors? Do you think that as an ambassador there should be more attention to cultural diplomacy, maybe more cooperation with those cultural institutes? Or do you believe that the area of cultural diplomacy is more for the cultural institutes and not really for ambassadors?
No, not at all. I've been doing it all the time. I never imagined my work without it. And since you asked me about cultural diplomacy in America, I'm so happy that we started programs with ICD in Washington. And every time when ICD has a program out there, I host either a full day of sessions and an evening event. So I like to think of myself as your extended arm in the US.
Okay, well, that's very glad to hear. Thank you very much for making time for this interview. I think you really are an inspiration to the field of cultural diplomacy in the area of ambassadors. And on behalf of the ICD, I'd like to thank you very much.
Thank you. That was nice.